The day the bank took our trailer, I stood in the rain with my wife and kids, clutching a dollar bill and a pile of empty tin cans, wondering how a man could fall so low. I'm Henry Caldwell, Hank to anyone who'd listen, and at 70, I've got a tale that starts in the muck and climbs to heights I couldn't fathom. It was 30 years ago in Bakersfield, California, a gritty sprawl of oil rigs and faded dreams where the sun scorches and the jobs dry up fast. That day, a rare rain pounded down, soaking us as the repo man hitched our double-wide to his truck and dragged it off. I'd spent 20 years at the lumber mill, shaping oak into tables and chairs, but the recession gutted it, leaving me with nothing but that soggy dollar and a stack of tin cans Ruth, my wife, had hoarded for scraps of cash. Ruth stood next to me, her graying hair dripping, her quiet strength holding us up when I couldn't. Nate, 15, kicked at the wet gravel, his jaw tight with a rage I knew too well, while Lila, 12, clung to her soaked stuffed rabbit, trembling in the cold. "What now, Dad?" Nate growled, his voice cutting through the downpour. I had no words, just the sting of failure and the weight of their eyes on me. The trailer was gone, the furniture I'd built sold off, our life washed away in that rain. I stooped, picking up a dented can, its cold metal slick against my palm. "We'll cash these in," I said, forcing grit into my voice. "Few cents each, better than zero." Ruth nodded, her faith unshaken, and we slogged to the recycling yard, kids in tow. As I tossed the cans in, a soggy flyer stuck to one caught my eye. "Turn trash to cash, Tin Can Crafts." Half torn, probably nonsense, but it lit a spark. I'd always been good with my hands. Why not turn this junk into something? Back at the borrowed truck we'd crammed into, I smoothed the paper out, hands shaking. "Lamps, maybe," I said to Ruth. "Or planters. People might buy 'em." She gave me that faint, real smile, and for a moment, the rain didn't matter. I looked at my family, wet, tired, but still here, and swore I'd dig us out, one can at a time. That dollar wasn't the end. It was where we'd start. Weeks bled into months, a blur of heat and hunger in that rusty truck parked behind a Bakersfield gas station. I'd been a craftsman once, turning raw lumber into heirlooms, but the mill's collapse left me scrambling. Ruth stitched clothes for pennies. Nate and Lila quit school to scrounge cans, their childhood traded for survival. I'd started hammering those tins into lamps and planters, ugly, crooked things, but it was something. We'd sell a few at the weekend market, enough for bread and gas, and I'd dream of more, of pulling us out of this hole. Then came the flop. I'd spent days on a batch, 20 tin lamps, my best yet, hoping a shop downtown would take him. Ruth helped me load the truck, Lila drew little tags, and we drove over, hearts high. The owner barely glanced before snorting. "These look like trash, not decor. I'd lose customers stocking this junk." He shoved them back, and one fell, cracking open on the pavement. I stood there, rain from that first day echoing in my head, feeling every bit the fool. "Guess I'm better at spilling cans than selling 'em," I muttered, forcing a laugh, but Ruth's silence stung worse than the rejection. Nate snapped that night. We were back in the truck, the busted lamp between us. "This is pointless, Dad," he yelled, kicking the door. "You're killing us with this crap. When's it gonna work?" I fired back. "You think I like this? I'm trying, damn it." He glared, 19 and burning with a fire I'd lost. "You don't get it. I'm done." He grabbed his bag and stormed off into the dark. Ruth begged him to stay, Lila cried, but he didn't look back. Word came later he'd taken a job at the dump, picking trash, same as us, and I figured he'd washed his hands of me. I sat alone after, hammering a can flat, the clang drowning my guilt. He was right, it wasn't working. But I couldn't quit. Ruth and Lila needed me, and somewhere maybe Nate did too. I'd keep going, even if it was just me and these damn cans against the world. Years scraped by in Bakersfield's unrelenting dust, and we'd scratched our way from that truck to a shack with a leaky roof. My tin can lamps and planters, still rough, still cheap, sold just enough to keep us alive. Ruth stitched rags into clothes, Lila hunted cans in alleys, and I hammered away, each clang a prayer we'd make it. Nate was a ghost, 5 years since he'd stormed off at 19, after that fight over my failed lamps. I'd heard he was hauling trash at the dump, and I'd let myself believe he'd turned his back on us. The shame ate at me, but I kept going, piling cans like they could bury the past. One blistering afternoon, Ruth and I were sorting a measly haul, our little dream on its last legs, when a truck growled up, loaded with gear. A man stepped out, broad, bearded, eyes like mine but sharper. Nate, 25 now, dirt streaked across his face. I dropped a can, my hands balling into fists. "What's this?" I snarled, voice shaking. "Come to laugh at us? Show off your big shot life while we rot." He didn't blink, just hauled a crate over and dropped it at my feet. "Open it, Dad," he said, calm as stone. Ruth clutched my arm, trembling, and I kicked the lid off. Inside gleamed tin lamps, sleek, perfect, stamped Caldwell Tin Works. My knees buckled, and I knocked over a stack of cans, the crash loud in the silence. "Still a klutz," Nate said, a grin tugging his lips, and Lila's laugh broke through, soft and startled. "Explain yourself," I roared, stepping closer, fury boiling. "You leave us, disappear, and now this? What game you playing?" He held my glare, unflinching. "No game. I worked the dump, saved every dime, took your idea and made it real. That's a workshop in Fresno, small but growing. Thousands in sales, Dad. I'm here to pull you out." Ruth sobbed, a hand over her mouth, and I froze, the fight draining out of me. He hadn't run. He'd taken my busted dream and forged it into something solid, while I'd spent years cursing him. "Why didn't you say?" I whispered, throat tight. "Thought you'd never trust me," he said, voice low. "Had to prove it first." The air shifted, and I saw it, my boy not lost, but found, lifting us when I'd given up. The next 10 years roared past like a freight train. Nate's workshop swelled, shed to factory, and Caldwell Tin Works turned tin into treasure. Lamps, vases, sculptures, snapped up from coast to coast. Ruth's designs gave them soul, Lila's numbers kept us sharp, and I tinkered, my old hands finding rhythm again. Nate steered it all, his fire burning brighter than mine ever had. We traded the shack for a house, then a fortune, millions piling up from those cans I'd once scraped for pennies. Bakersfield's dust stayed with us, but now it shone. One night, I sat on our porch, the desert cooling under a red-streaked sky, a tin lamp humming beside me. Nate dropped down, 2 beers in hand. "Ever think we'd get here?" he asked, passing one over. I took a sip, the cold biting my tongue. "Not after I torched that first batch," I said, grinning. "Nearly set the truck on fire. Ruth still teases me about it." He laughed, deep and easy, then went quiet. "Those dump days," he said, staring at the horizon. "I'd sift trash till my hands bled, thinking if I failed, you'd all be stuck. Kept me going." The words hit hard, and I set the beer down, turning to him. "You bled for us?" I asked, voice rough. He nodded, eyes steady. "Had to. You taught me stubborn runs in the blood." I reached over, gripped his shoulder, firm, real, and felt the years melt away. Inside, Ruth and Lila laughed over a catalog, their voices a warm echo. We'd built this, not just with tin, but with a trust I'd almost broken. Family isn't about never cracking, it's who welds the pieces when you do. I thought Nate had ditched us, but he'd carried us, turning my scraps into millions. Resilience isn't loud, it's a kid bleeding in the dump, a wife sowing hope, a daughter counting us to the top. Ever think someone's gone, only to find they've hauled you from nothing to everything? That's us, tin can millionaires, forged in love and grit.